Okay.
Okay, so I'm William Baker, and William Baker Pottery, and I am going to show how to throw a bottomless cylinder, which is going to be then altered into a square. So first I'm going to throw, this is about 2.5 pounds of clay, and while I'm throwing this into a cylinder, I'll just mention a few things about it. So I've been squaring a lot of pots in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, and this is just the way that I've come up with. My main concern as I'm throwing this cylinder is that I don't want the walls to be too thin, because I'm going to be altering it a good bit. And I'm also going to be sure forming it and shaving it down and paddling it, doing all kind of things to it. So I want it to have a little bit of clay left there. So as I'm centered, and for this, I don't really have an exact measurement. I'm just kind of going by experience, how wide I want it. And I do make these in all different shapes and sizes. So this one is going to be rectangular. So I'm going to open this all the way up to the bat. So when I'm done opening this up, I want it to have a slight taper inward, just a little bit. And I'm going to want the walls to be about, probably about 3/4 of an inch thick. So that's about as wide as I want it at the base. And then right before I pull this up, I'm going to bring it back in just a little bit, sort of collaring it in. And my main concerns here are the rim. I want to keep this nice and thick and also tapered in a little bit. And I'm probably going to pull this about maybe 2 times. And normally on a lot of my pots I have a very smooth surface, so that's intentional.
So these are the pots that you're going to be making, like these?
Similar. These are all made in the same way as the one I'm making now.
Okay.
These are thrown without a bottom, and then altered and paddled and ribbed and all kind of things. But so the smooth texture that I'm going for, normally to get that I'll have to use a rib to rib the surface a good bit. But on these pots I'm going to alter them so much that a lot of these lines will actually come out in that process. So I'm going to stop pulling there because that will be about the thickness I want. And make sure the top is beveled in.
So you leave it pretty thick?
Yeah, my pots have never been accused of being thin.
It's a horrible thing.
So smooth that a little bit, and then so I'll bevel this bottom edge just a little bit. This is mainly just to make it easier to get off the wheel head. And then here's where, before I take this off, I would rib this usually with a wooden rib first, and then a metal rib to finish it up. But this just gives an idea of how I'll get rid of those lines. So I'll end up with something roughly shaped like this, tapers in a little bit at the top. And then this would be about all I would do with this one. I would stop there and cut that off the wheel. As I cut that off the wheel with the wire, I will oval it. And it will be very wet, obviously, so I'll just oval it with my hands, pick it up, set it down, and come back to it later when it firms up a bit. So here's one that's firmed up. This one was thrown last night. And all I've done to this so far, after I picked it up, I ovaled it, and then I let it set for a while. I came back to it, probably about 6 or 8 hours later, and started to paddle it just enough to give a hint of these lines here. So then to finish that, you can see that's what the cylinder should look like more or less. There's the thickness I'm going for. And I've got a slab that I've thrown out and rolled out a little bit for thickness with a rolling pin. And I'm going to trim that down.
So you're going to paddle these lines and make them pretty sharp edges
Yep.
here like that?
That is the slow part. So I don't make very many of these pots at a time. I make them in very small batches because coming back to them later, after they're thrown, is what takes the longest. So that's the start of that, and then before I attach that slab, to get this angle here, I will basically just mark this out freehand. So I'm going to look here, and here, and I'm just making myself marks so that I can get about the shape I want. And then I'm going to take that up about an inch on the side. And this is just giving me the marks so that I can cut it off where I want. And I'll go back and cut that piece out. And this started, originally I wasn't doing this when I was making forms like this, but as I would paddle the slab on, I found that the edges were sort of wanting to come up in this way, and so then I decided to just encourage it and kept going with it that way. So I would attach this slab, I would score and slip it, which we will skip for now. Skip. In the interest of time. So here's the bottom of that cylinder, just with a few quick cuts. So I'll score this. You can see it's nice and thick, and you'll see in a minute why it sort of needs to be a little thicker rather than thinner. So normally the way I would do this would be make sure that this is off the bat. So when I make a larger version of these, I have a mold, sort of a temporary impromptu mold that I made, which I can sit a slab like this in that mold, and it will allow it to take shape in the mold before I attach it to the pot. So I can already get this angled on the bottom. But with these smaller ones, I can just do it sort of freehand like this. So, something like this, like a pot like this, is made in very much the same way. Only difference being, of course, that this one is thrown a little more closed in on the top. So this one actually came after I've made a number of these. Decided to make one that was a little more open, a little more accessible for flowers or whatever you might want to put in there. And then the rest of this slab will be basically trimmed off. So all of this excess will be slowly trimmed off. If I want to leave a thick rim or edge, then I will trim less off and I will turn this into that. But for a pot like this, I'll actually trim most of this off. And then what is left, I'll start to blend that in to the top portion. So from here on out, it gets slower and slower. So this slab will be slowly blended into the body. A lot of the times I'm using my fingers. At some point, I start